In the hardcore wrestling world, Sabu is a pioneer. He made a name for himself in Japan in FMW, receiving scars all over his body after a bunch of hardcore matches, barbed wire death matches, and even teaming up with his trainer and uncle the Sheik in a Ring of Fire death match. After FMW though, Sabu found himself in ECW. He debuted in October of 1993 in a match against Taz at NWA Bloodfest. The hardcoreness of Sabu got him a quick push to main event status, and in his second ever ECW match, he faced Shane Douglas for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship, and after hitting him with a moonsault, Sabu pinned him and became the new World Heavyweight Champion in his second ECW bout. Sabu defended the title for the first time against Taz, and defended successfully. Then he found himself in a tag team match at the first ever November to Remember pay-per-view, teaming up with Road Warrior Hawk against Terry Funk and King Kong Bundy, with Sabu's ECW World title and Terry Funk's TV title on the line. You wouldn't expect it, but in his first pay-per-view match and second title defense, Sabu managed to pin Terry Funk after King Kong Bundy turned on him, becoming the new ECW World Television Champion and a double champion already. However, Terry Funk wanted his revenge on Sabu, and he got his shot at the Holiday Hell pay-per-view. Terry Funk managed to pin Sabu, snatching the ECW World Heavyweight Championship back from him. Sabu then had to defend his television title in a match against Pat Tanaka, and defended successfully. Then he'd get a shot at getting the World Heavyweight Championship back from Terry Funk, but this time in a three-way dance, including Shane Douglas at ECW's The Night the Line Was Crossed. Unfortunately, Sabu couldn't get the job done, and the match ended in a time limit draw, meaning that Terry Funk would keep the title. So Sabu started to focus on defending his television championship, and he successfully defended it against Mike Awesome. But after this defense, he had to put the title on the line in a match against Taz, and Taz snatched the title from Sabu, leaving Sabu titleless. However, Sabu wouldn't let this hold him back. He jumped back into the rivalry with Terry Funk, defeating him in a singles match, and ended the rivalry, at least for now, at When Worlds Collide, when he teamed up with Bobby Eaton and defeated Funk and Arn Anderson. He picked up victories in matches against Too Cold Scorpio, Cactus Jack at Hostile City Showdown, and then Sabu pulled off a win over Terry Funk the night after. After a bit of a winning streak, he found himself in a match against now ECW World Heavyweight Champion Shane Douglas at ECW Heatwave. Sabu put up a good effort, but after he missed a moonsault to the outside right into a table, he got counted out, and Shane Douglas remained champ. However, a week later, he faced Al Snow in a ladder match over at NWA for the first ever NWA Independent World Championship, and Sabu grabbed the victory and the belt. His next ECW appearance would be at the Hardcore Heaven pay-per-view, in another match against Too Cold Scorpio, and Sabu got the win. Then he picked up wins over Cactus Jack, JT Smith, and Mr. Hughes and Shane Douglas in a tag team match, teaming up with 911. But then, Sabu faced Cactus Jack again in a False Count Anywhere match, and unfortunately, he couldn't get the win this time. Sabu and 911 then teamed up with Taz in a 6-man tag, this time against Dean Malenko and the Pitbulls, but the team of Sabu, 911 and Taz were victorious. You'd think things were looking up again for Sabu here, but nah. A week later, at the 1994 November to Remember pay-per-view, Sabu faced Chris Benoit in a singles match, and after wrestling for only 2 minutes, the match ended in a no contest after Benoit injured Sabu's spinal cord, giving him nerve damage, and this is apparently where Benoit got the Crippler nickname. Anyway, Sabu, being the madman that he is, returned to the ring only 2 weeks later in a match against Cactus Jack, and he even got the win. Then, the day later, Sabu teamed up with Taz again to face the Malenko brothers, Dean and Joe Malenko, and Sabu and Taz prevailed in this one as well. Going into 1995, Sabu and Taz kept their tag team going, and even managed to get a shot at the ECW World Tag Team titles, when they found themselves in a match against champions Public Enemy. Unfortunately for Taz and Sabu, they wasn't able to grab the gold, but the team still stood strong. Then, they'd need the help of 911 as well, as they ended up in a 4-on-3 handicap match against Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and both members of Public Enemy. Despite being a man down, the team of Sabu, 911 and Taz got the win. And then Sabu spent some time wrestling for New Japan for about a month. After his time over there, he came back fresh as a daisy and beat Al Snow. And then at the ECW Double Tables pay-per-view, Sabu and Taz picked up the ECW World Tag Team titles after they defeated Public Enemy and put that rivalry to bed. Sabu defeated Scorpio in another match, and then looked to end the rivalry with Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko. Sabu and Taz would put the titles on the line against them at the return of the Funker pay-per-view, but unfortunately, they'd lose the titles after only 3 weeks of holding. After this, Sabu beat Mikey Whipwreck in a match, and started to wrestle in New Japan even more often. He seemed to like Japan so much that he no-showed an ECW show for a New Japan one, and he was legitimately fired by Paul Heyman, making this match his last one of his first ECW run. However, after picking up titles in Japan and some appearances in WCW and other promotions, he returned to ECW 8 months later at the 1995 November to Remember pay-per-view, where he faced Hack Myers and got a pretty easy W. Then Sabu defeated Public Enemy's Rocco Rock in a match. Then at the final pay-per-view of 1995, Holiday Hell, he faced Cactus Jack and got the victory after flipping onto Jack with a chair and getting the pin. He'd also pull off victories at the next 2 pay-per-views as well, with wins over Stevie Richards at House Party and Mr. Hughes at Big Apple Blizzard Blast. What is it with ECW and these pay-per-view names? Anyway, after getting nothing but W's going into 1996, Sabu got a shot at the television championship in a match against champion Too Cold Scorpio at CyberSlam. Unfortunately, the match ended in a time limit draw, and Scorpio kept the title. The same thing happened at the ECW Just Another Night event, and at the Big Ass Extreme American Bash. Then, after beating Mikey Whipwreck at Massacre on Queens Boulevard, and 2 more time limit draws against Scorpio, he found himself in a match at Hostile City Showdown against Rob Van Dam, and thankfully, there were no time limits for this one. Both of these guys were trained by the Sheik, and it was a pretty even match, but eventually, it was Sabu who came out victorious after driving RVD into a chair and hitting him with a DDT and a triple jump moonsault. Sabu started to show respect to RVD after the match and put his hand out for a handshake, but of course, RVD walked away and refused to shake Sabu's hand. Funnily enough, this disrespect from RVD led to a rematch between the two, a matter of respect. Sabu went for the same moonsault that took out RVD last time, but this time, RVD got his knees up and hit a split leg moonsault on Sabu for the win. And respectfully, Sabu still wanted to shake the hand of RVD, but again, RVD pushed away Sabu's hand and says not only does he not respect Sabu, but he's a piece of shit. So the rivalry between Sabu and RVD continued, and Sabu would grab victories over him in a match at Hardcore Heaven, in a stretcher match at The Doctor Is In, and then in a match at Unlucky Lottery, and this was where Sabu finally got RVD's respect. However, as RVD was about to shake Sabu's hand, Doug Furness and Dan Crawford, the Can-Am Express, jumped them both, which forced the two to team up and face the Can-Am Express at When Worlds Collide. The match, however, would end up in a time limit draw, but they would rematch at High Incident, and this time, Sabu and Van Dam got the win, showing that they were a lethal tag team. The rivalry between the two had ended, and the tag team of Sabu and RVD went on to challenge for the ECW World Tag Team Championship. They faced the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Cronus in a tag team match for the #1 contender spot in November to Remember. But this one ended in another time limit draw, and both teams would have to face the Gangsters, New Jack and Mustafa Saeed, in a 3-way elimination tag match. But the Gangsters got the victory over both teams. However, the Eliminators ended up beating the Gangsters for the titles, and RVD and Sabu were right back into the title picture, and right back into the rivalry with the Eliminators. They'd faced the Eliminators for the titles at Crossing the Line again, but were unsuccessful, and again in a tables and ladders match at CyberSlam. But the team of Sabu and RVD managed to win over the Eliminators in another tables and ladders match, but unfortunately it was a non-title match. After losing in another tables and ladders match, and in a three-way tag team elimination match for the titles, Sabu and RVD would stay strong as a tag team. And while all this was going on, Sabu's former teammate Taz started to call out Sabu at every opportunity he got, but Sabu ignored him for a whole year. Eventually, Taz beat Sabu in a match of barely legal, and Taz offered a handshake to Sabu. But before they could shake each other's hands, RVD attacked Taz, and Sabu joined in, and the two proceeded to jump him. After this, Sabu and RVD got another shot at the ECW World Tag Team Championships in another three-way elimination tag match against champs the Eliminators and Devon Dudley and Big Dick Dudley. But the champs managed to retain the belts, and Sabu and RVD still couldn't get a hold of the tag championships. They came back with a win in their next match though, against the Pitbulls, and then they had to face Taz again, but this time with Chris Candido as his tag partner. Candido and Taz pulled off a win in this one, but the two teams met in a rematch the week after, and this time, Sabu and RVD got the win. Then at WrestlePalooza 1997, Sabu and Taz would face each other one-on-one, but before the match got underway, just after Tommy Dreamer fought his way to a victory in a loser leaves town match against Raven, the lights in the arena went out, and when they came back on, we saw RVD and Sabu jumping Dreamer. The lights went out again after the beating, and when they came back on again, there stood Jerry the King Lawler from WWE's commentary team. He said on the mic that there's nothing but shit in ECW, and he even called Bueller a slut. As Sabu and RVD continue to put a beat down on Dreamer, King leaves the ring, and the crowd starts to chant "We want Taz." Eventually, Taz would answer the crowd and cleared out the whole ring. Taz grabbed the mic, made it clear that he wanted to scrap Sabu right now, and after Fonzie made a decision to call Taz a fat boy, Taz got him in a Taz mission, and Sabu had to come back out to make the save. So the match between Sabu and Taz got underway, and Sabu managed to win, rolling up Taz for a surprise 3 count, and handing Taz his first loss in almost 2 years, keeping the rivalry hot. After this, Taz beat Shane Douglas to become the new World Television Champion, and Sabu kept teaming up with RVD in tag matches, getting victories over Chris Candido and Taz, Tommy Dreamer and Sandman, and the Pitbulls. Before Sabu and Taz met one-on-one again, Sabu would have to face ECW World Heavyweight Champ Terry Funk in a match, but he lost, and it led to a rematch between the two at Born to be Wired, in a barbed wire death match. Sabu managed to pull off the win after a brutal match, even after ripping open his bicep and having to tape it up mid-match, and he became the new ECW World Heavyweight Champ. However, a week later at Hardcore Heaven, he dropped the title in a 3-way match against Terry Funk and Shane Douglas, and Douglas was declared the new champion when he pinned Terry Funk. Sabu would get a rematch against Douglas at the Homecoming, but unfortunately he lost. Since Sabu and RVD aligned with Jerry Lawler, they were used in the WWE's Invasion angle, and after beating up Tommy Dreamer like they did, they also got into a feud with Dreamer and Sandman. So yeah, they were basically feuding with the whole of ECW at this point. Anyway, Sabu and RVD beat Dreamer and Sandman twice, and then Sabu found himself in a singles match against Sandman, which ended in a no contest. But then, he went on to beat Tommy Dreamer twice in singles matches, and then finally got back to Taz, and he'd face him this time for the TV title. But guess what? It was back to the time limit draws for Sabu. So Taz kept the title, and the same happened at Fight Fight. At Ultimate Jeopardy though, Taz and Tommy Dreamer teamed up, and they defeated Sabu and RVD in a tag match. And then, Sabu would find himself in a Singapore Cane match against the Singapore Cane specialist Sandman, but Sabu would actually get the win and beat him in his own match. This led to Sabu and Sandman facing off at November to Remember in a tables and ladders match, where Sabu got the win again. However, they'd face each other again at House Party in a Stairway to Hell match, and this time, Sabu lost. But Sabu would finally end the rivalry, beating Sandman in a Julian Canes match at Living Dangerously. Sabu and RVD were on top of the world at this time, and they continued their journey as a tag team, beating teams like Sandman and Too Cold Scorpio and the Dudley Boys. At WrestlePalooza 1998 though, Sabu respectfully challenged RVD for his World Television Championship. But after wrestling for 30 minutes, the match ended in a time limit draw. The two remained a tag team despite wrestling each other, and they eventually got a shot at the ECW Tag Team Championships again. This time against champions Lance Storm and Chris Candido, and this time Sabu and RVD would get the win, and finally picked up the tag titles together. They defended the belt against Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney, former champs Chris Candido and Lance Storm, the FBI, then they defeated Candido and Storm, and the Dudley Boys in a 6-man tag. Unfortunately, the Dudley Boys got the win and snatched the belts off Sabu and RVD. As they lost the belts, they decided to team up with Taz at the November to Remember pay-per-view to face the new triple threat, which consisted of Bam Bam Bigelow, Shane Douglas, and Chris Candido. Sabu and RVD won this one, and they'd get another shot at the Dudleys and the tag titles. However, Taz teamed up with Shane Douglas and was also added to the match, but the Dudley Boys came out on top and retained the titles. Sabu and RVD weren't done there though. They got one more shot at the Dudleys and the belts at an FMW and ECW Super Show, and they managed to pick up their second tag team championships as a tag team. And a week after that, Sabu picked up the FTW title in a match against Taz and Justin Credible. This forced Sabu back into his rivalry with Taz after he suffered some injuries from Taz in the match, and he tried to get revenge when he returned from injury and interfered in Taz's match with Shane Douglas, but he actually ended up helping Taz win, and not only win the match, but winning the ECW World Heavyweight Championship as well. So after this, Sabu and RVD defended their tag team titles against the hardcore chair swinging freaks, Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney, a house party, and then Sabu would finally face Taz again and put the rivalry to an end. This time, they'd battle it out in a Falls Count Anywhere match, a Living Dangerously, with Sabu's FTW Championship and Taz's World Heavyweight Championship on the line. Unfortunately, Sabu didn't get the job done, and Taz won the match. As for RVD, he had to defend the tag team titles alone against Devon Dudley in a singles match, and he lost them as well. When Sabu returned in the summer of 1999, he fell into a feud with Justin Credible, which led to a match at Anarchy Rules, and Justin Credible got the win after a cheap chair shot and multiple interferences. Sabu didn't even want a rematch though. He went on to way bigger things, and he ended up challenging RVD for his TV championship once again. And this time, we didn't get a time limit draw. But Sabu lost, and then failed to win in another rematch. It wasn't looking too good for Sabu, but he beat Chris Candido at November to Remember, and managed to force RVD to give him another shot at the title at Guilty as Charged. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to grab the title again, and this was his final pay-per-view appearance for ECW. After this, he beat C.W. Anderson, then beat Scott D'Amore, and then finally left ECW to go adventure the indie circuit. Even though it went downhill for Sabu at the end, and even though he didn't manage to grab another TV title, Sabu's a name that you'll always associate with ECW, and there's no doubt he was as talented as they come. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, click here for RVD's story in ECW, and if you want to become one of the Dogs yourself, check the links in the description.